name is Timothy Brick. I'm assistant professor at Kyiv School of I'm sorry. I'm assistant professor at Kyiv School of Economics, of course. And this has been a while for us. This is a day 22 of the war, which has been like a one very long day for me with many small naps. That's why I'm talking weird, and I apologize to the audience. Unfortunately, the circumstances of that motivated us to launch these lectures are very dramatic and sad. We are watching the news from eastern, southern, and northern Ukraine. Our cities are bombed. Civilians are suffering. Yesterday, there was an air strike in the city of Mariupol, destroying a drama theater in the very city center. So this war is not only against the statehood, military, and civilians. This war has been against culture and knowledge. And here at Kyiv School of Economics, we want to show that academics stand strong in solidarity with all other Ukrainians. And we want to keep doing what we know how to do, to produce knowledge, to share knowledge, to discuss knowledge. And that's why we have initiated this series of solidarity talks, inviting top intellectuals, thinkers, scholars, artists, diplomats from different countries, from Europe and from the United States and from Canada, to discuss important and relevant ideas. And we believe that it is very important to keep talking about what is happening in Ukraine, in the world, in Russia, just to have this honest conversation about, our life and our future. And today we have quite a special guest. He's quite known philosopher and linguist, Jason Stanley, who is a professor of philosophy at Yale University. He has written many books, and one of his recent books addresses fascism, how fascism works. And today he's going to present something which is quite relevant to what is happening today in Russia, Ukraine, and some other countries, which is propaganda. And I will just, pass this virtual floor to Professor Stanley, and we will be happy to listen to your lecture for 30, 40 minutes, depending on your preference, and then I will moderate with Q&A. So thank you very much for being with us. It is very important for us to be able to gather here online and to listen to your talk. So thank you, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Professor Brick. It's an honor to be speaking to my colleagues in Ukraine. So I'm going to be presenting academic work. I'm going to be, because it's a distinguished university, and as Professor Brick said, the attack is imperialist, colonialist, fascist attacks are always on intellectual life as well. So I'm going to be presenting work for my forthcoming book with the linguist David Beaver. The book is called The Politics of Language. So let me now share the screen. So the foundations of propagandistic speech. So a lot of philosophy of language and linguistics are focused on information, on how we communicate information. The cat is on the mat, the store is around the corner. As a result, when we talk about propaganda, we're led to labels like disinformation, false claims. And then because it's easy algorithmically, computationally, it's easy in models to hunt out false claims and eliminate them. But this is just an extremely partial approach to issues like propaganda and even political speech. For example, think of the label, the problem of disinformation. Much of what we call disinformation is not, in fact, disinformation or false claims. You might have, as in the case of the United States, whenever there's sort of focus on crime and a drive to incarcerate usually Black American men, they'll focus on an incident, a violent incident, and that violent incident might have happened, but then they'll make it seem as if that's very typical and these violent incidents are happening everywhere, but they won't say that. They'll just say, look at this violent incident. So a lot of disinformation will takes the form of just communicating information. Similarly, other things we call disinformation, think of vaccine conspiracy theories, panics about critical race theory, panics about atrocities done to supposed atrocities done to ethnic Russians. These are methods to build identity. They're not really methods to communicate information or even disinformation. They're rather there to stir up emotions. And in fact, this is the point of a lot of political speech. Let's look at, and if you look at, if you have a model, an approach to speech that is only trying to explain communicating information, you're going to miss out on the fact that the most famous and preserved aspects of speech are political speeches. So look at maybe the two most famous speeches in Western intellectual history. Pericles' funeral oration at the end of the first year of the Peloponnesian War, and Cleon's speech in the Mytilenean debate. So Pericles, what Pericles does in his speech is he mixes Athenian identity with democracy, pointing out that democracy is the very spirit of Athens, that you can't really separate democracy and Athens. Democracy and Athens mean the same thing. Athens is defined by democracy, its culture of democracy. And he connects Athenian identity to democracy.
Professor Stanley, I apologize. I think I hear you clicking the mouse, but the slides are not moving. So if you
I'm putting up the do you see I see what you're saying. Let me go back to
so I see only the starting slide with the foundations of propagandistic speech.
Got it. I was showing Pericles' speech, but I'll just talk about it. So what Pericles does in the funeral oration is he mixes Athenian identity with democracy, and he says, look, Sparta, their citizens are just trained to fight from the very beginning. They're not educated. They're just told, you must do what the leader tells you. Here's swords. We're going to go to war. And he says, and yet our soldiers are better. Our soldiers are better because they voluntarily fight. They choose to fight. They fight because they decide this is the culture and nation they want to preserve. So what Pericles is doing, this is a political speech. It is propaganda. Not all propaganda is bad, but it mixes democracy with the identity of a city-state. Now take Cleon's speech in the Mytilenean debate. Cleon says, Cleon starts by saying, personally, I have an occasion enough already to observe that a democracy is incapable of governing others. Cleon is trying to argue that Athens should slaughter everyone in Mytilene for the rebellion against Athens. And what he says is that democracies can't be empires because empires are brutal. Empires subjugate, and empires destroy. And democracies give too much to intellectuals. He says, you should rule not with intellectuals, but with just, intellectuals like want to talk, and what you need to do to be an empire is just be brutal, just destroy. And this is incompatible with being a democracy. What Cleon does is he says, so the Mytilenean lives are irrelevant. The fact that he says we should forget about being a democracy, we should just be an empire. And in an empire, only our lives matter. The lives of others who are not us do not matter. And that's incompatible with being a democracy. So Cleon is saying your Athenian identity, your ethnic Athenian identity dominates everything else and no one's else life matters. He's not saying that. He doesn't say that in words. It's rather by focusing on Athenian identity and telling you, Athenian identity must be the only thing that matters and no other and so we can kill all the Mytileneans for revolting. That's what an empire does. His speech focuses on an Athenian national sort of city identity, Athenian identity, whereas Pericles is mixing democracy with Athenian identity. And he's saying, it's because we are fundamentally democratic that we choose to fight and we are better warriors. And so each of these, but this is not just a string of propositions, these speeches. These speeches evoke emotion, they connect identity with values and ideals, and that's something that, to say the least, is hard to model. And what we try to do in our work is model that. Okay, let's see. Hold on. Let's see. Hold on. Sorry, I have to my Microsoft PowerPoint. So okay. So how do we model this? So why have philosophy? How do we model? What are the puzzles that propaganda raises? Well, propaganda involves social meaning, schemas that are culturally assigned to actions, objects, events, and such. And it's not clear how to model social meaning. Social meaning is not, a proposition. It's not, dogs bark. It's a set of emotions, symbols. We need to attend to the way people speak, speech practices, but it's not clear how to model speech practices. And then we need to think about how being inside a group or outside a group, how identity affects communication. And that's something that's not just a matter of the propositions asserted. Generally, in the theory of meaning, we've been focusing just on what happens when people in the same group talk to each other. But what about group formation? What about speech that's meant to form a group? You might think that spreading COVID conspiracies about vaccines is an attempt to spread information or disinformation. But what if it's instead a method of just forming a group? This is our group. These are the kinds of things we say. Okay, so I'm going to skip. These are, so in the theory of meaning, philosophy of language, we tend to make certain idealizations in order to make it easier to model the data. We assume that it's one speaker and one hearer, that speaker and hearer are cooperating with each other, that everyone is rational, that all the intentions are transparent, that everything relevant to interpretation is mutually known and shared, that we're sharing neutral bits of information, and that already you see in like Cleon's speech, the only perspective that's even visible is the Athenian perspective. And what Cleon is saying is that's imperialism. If Athens wants to be an empire, no one else's perspective can be shared. So Cleon says we have to kill all the Mytileneans because they rebelled, because if we don't do that, it will show weakness. Their lives don't even matter. So it's not from a neutral perspective. Okay, so but obviously we do all sorts of things that are not from a neutral perspective. Obviously we do all sorts of things that are not transparent. We make all sorts of conversational moves that are not transparent. For instance, insinuation. Suppose you're stopped by a police officer. Suppose you're stopped by a police officer, and the police officer, and you want to bribe the police officer, I'm very sorry, officer, but I'm in the middle of something right now, sort of an emergency. So maybe the best thing would be to take care of this here without going to work or doing any paperwork. So here I'm insinuating that I'll give him money to get off. Insinuations allow for plausible deniability. So I didn't mean that. I didn't say that. What do you mean? I wasn't offering you a bribe if you're called on that. And that's a general feature of conversation. And very often, especially in political speech, what you're insinuating is the primary thing, the reason you're talking in the first place. So if we can't handle insinuation, we can't have any understanding of what's going on in speech. So here's another example of what insinuation, what transparency masks. Here's a classic instance, a dog whistle. So this is Lee Atwater, George Bush's senior's 1988 campaign manager. You start out in 1954 by saying N-word, N-word, N-word. That's a slur for Black Americans. By 1968, you can't say N-word, that hurts you, backfires. So you say stuff like forced busing, states' rights, and all that stuff. You're getting so abstract now that you're talking about cutting taxes. And all these things you're talking about are totally economic things. And a byproduct of them is that Blacks get hurt worse than whites. And subconsciously, maybe that is part of it. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying that if it's getting that abstract and that coded, we are doing away with the racial problem one way or another. So what he's talking about is that it's a coded method. When you say in American politics, we want to do people not see the slides?
We're discussing this now in the chat. I can see the slides, so I don't understand what's happening, but I can see them.
Okay.
One of the two people have said that they don't see the slides.
Okay. All right. Okay.
However, okay. So apparently, I'm the only one who sees a slide.
I see. Okay. So all right.
So Professor Stanley, can you please just go on, and our IT guy will try to help you, but you can continue with the lecture.
I'll continue and I'll try to. Okay. So I'll continue, and then maybe the ID guy can let me.
Yeah, I will chat with him. Yeah.
Okay. So okay. So I'll talk through as if so a dog whistle is an expression that communicates multiple. It has one innocent meaning and one problematic meaning. So a dog whistle is when you use a dog whistle, you're communicating one thing to an audience that shares your ideology, say a racist ideology, but when people call you on it, when people say no, when people say, are you saying something racist? You say, no, I'm just using the ordinary meaning. What are you talking about? So the word when you describe something as a welfare program in America, for people who have racist views, they come to have a negative view of that program. They think it's for Black people, but for Black Americans. But when politicians are then told, oh, you're using a racist word, why are you calling it a welfare program? Why are you using language that's coded in that way? They'll deny it. They'll deny that they'll deny that they meant the racist message. Okay, slides are visible on YouTube. Excellent. So I'm going to pause while people shift to YouTube because you can see so you can see the slides on YouTube. So you want to have an account of when politicians can engage in this kind of plausible deniability. so the plausible deniability is when you insinuate a message that you don't literally say. Another way of engaging in plausible deniability is when you use a coded word. So both of these are methods for communicating things that you don't want to be held responsible for, and we need a theory of meaning to explain that. So how do we do this? How do we adjust a theory of meaning that's designed mainly for information and disinformation? Like, words have meanings that are things in the world. And when I say dogs bark, dogs refers to all the dogs, barks refers to a kind of action. I put it together, but that is just too simple for what's going on with political speech and propaganda. So we can extend the theory of meaning. We can use the devices that we've used, or we can just apply the things we've already done, or we can extend the scope by having new formal structures and tools. That's what we do in our work. Or you could say, really, there's no system. You need to give an entirely new theory, some theory that is not systematic, maybe, or some entirely new theory. Or you could deny that these phenomena can be theorized at all, that there's nothing general to be said about rhetoric and propaganda. So the philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein in the Philosophical Investigations, he criticizes thinking the long history of thinking about meaning in philosophy, and he says he talks about his famous example of slab. It's modeled on this idea that there's this word-world relationship. We're just naming things, but so much else is going on. There's a whole language game when we speak. Each word connects us to a network of associations. But as Michael Dummett's point says, it's never clear whether Wittgenstein intends to be giving some radical new theory or saying you cannot theorize about this at all, that language and culture are so intertwined that really a theory of language is just a theory of culture, and there's no generalizations there. And this goes into the next issue of dealing with political speech and propaganda. Maybe you can't make generalizations at all. There's no abstracting. Any account of propaganda, any account of Russian propaganda against Ukraine will just be a history of Russia and a history of Ukraine. You're going to have to talk about the long historical relations between these neighboring countries, and there's nothing abstract that someone like me, a philosopher of language, can tell you about. Full screen, to make switch slides, full screen presentation. Okay, so slides are always same slide, propaganda without neutrality. Full screen presentation. Okay, stop share. Okay, stop share. So share, full screen presentation. Sorry about this.
No problem. You can start sharing your slides again, and I will help you to.
Okay. So what would be a full screen?
If you go with the mouse to the very bottom of the slides, and then to the right side, there is a little icon of like an open book, and you can click on it.
Is that showing implausible abstraction?
No. Nothing happened. So
okay. I'll just go with this. You can read these, right?
I can read this, but you should make sure that you switch between the slides.
Yep, I'll do it. How is that? Implausible abstraction. Can you see that?
Still propaganda without neutrality.
Oh my God.
Maybe slideshow. Another option would be to save this as a PDF.
No, I'm going to do this. I figured it out.
Okay.
How's that? What do you see now?
Implausible abstraction.
Now we got it. Sorry about this.
1 second. Yes, now this is full screen. Yeah. So
it was wrong. Okay.
Okay, now everything's fine. Apologize.
Everything's fine now. Sorry, my bad. Okay. So maybe there's just too much abstraction happening. Maybe propaganda is just a story of history, and there's no theory to be given. So, and a second concern is in explaining propaganda, in giving a model of speech for propaganda, you don't want to suggest that normal speech is just the pure handing back and forth of information. And that propaganda is just this muddy way, this way of muddying this. And once you clear out the propaganda, you'll just have pure information. There's no such thing as pure information. Whenever we speak, we're speaking from a perspective. And so our model of speech has to reflect the fact that we're always speaking from a perspective. Okay. So I'm going to go. So here's the architecture of the proposal. We're not just groups of people are distinguished by their joint attunement to particular practices and ideas. And what you do in political speech is you try to switch people's attunements to other practices, social identities, and information. So you're switching attunements. So don't think of meaning as a relationship between words and the world, and words carry around their meanings like cars carry around their passengers. Think of it as when we speak, we're trying to switch people's attention. We're trying to switch people's attention to practices, emotions, and also information. So for example, the actions of telling a racist joke and using a racial slur, these, as we're going to see, have resonances of racial ideologies and practices. And these resonances are transmitted in part by repeated actions. Repeating propaganda, repeating insulting slurs, it strengthens, the point there is to strengthen people's attunement to the affect, to the targets of the slurs. And that is a process that happens over time. So why practice? What action I perform? So practices make sense of the meaning of your action. So they without understanding the background practices, you don't understand the meaning of the action that is being called for. So Lynn Tirrel, the philosopher, in her 2012 paper, Genocidal Language Games, on the language of the Rwandan genocide, the language used by the propagandists. She talks about words connections, not to what they refer to, but to linguistic practices. And when you use a word, its connection to these background practices is often the function of the speech. It's something that you need to attend to. So she focuses on the language of the genocidal, what she calls deeply derogatory slurs. So take the example. So in Hutu power propaganda, they called Tutsis snakes. Now, why is this implicated in the run-up to the genocide, in the genocide? In Rwanda, snakes are a public health hazard. Killing poisonous snakes with a machete is a man's role in a household. And when a boy is allowed to take it, he is allowed to kill a snake with a machete. He is taking on this honored role as a man. So there were months and months when the Hutu power radio station, when the Hutu power movement, leaders of the Hutu power movement were calling Tutsi snakes. What were they doing? They were saying, if you engage in the practice towards a Tutsi that you engage in towards a snake, killing it with a machete, it makes you a man. So the function of calling Tutsi snakes was to regularize and normalize the idea that killing Tutsis with machetes will make you a man. Now, what's going on when Putin talks about denazification? Well, we've got to look at the practice of denazification in, say, West Germany. So denazification is a practice of having trials of Nazis, executing some, imprisoning others, and replacing the ideology of Nazism with liberal democratic ideology in schools and other institutions. Putin is saying this practice will be replicated, but with liberal democracy being replaced, the replaced ideology, and Russian fascism replacing it. So the idea is so he's telling you what he's going to do because of the link, because of the practices associated with denazification. Denazification involves trials. You put the leaders on trial. You do a systematic replacement of the Nazi ideology with liberal democratic ideology everywhere. And so you stamp that ideology out. And Putin is saying, we're going to stamp out Ukrainian civic nationalism and liberal democracy from institutions and schools and replace it with Russian fascism. It's the practice of denazification he's discussing. So presupposition, I'm not going to we don't have that much time to get into the details of how these mechanisms work. Presupposition is something, we're always presupposing things when we speak. So if I say I'm picking my sister up from the airport, I'm presupposing that I have a sister. If I say I'm not picking up my sister from the airport, I'm also presupposing that I have a sister. So we're always presupposing things. And we presuppose, so if I say it's John who solved the problem, or if I say John didn't solve the problem, then I'm presupposing there was a problem. So what's your answer to the problem of Ukrainian fascists? Presupposes that there are Ukrainian fascists. So that's propaganda. That's, you're presupposing something very controversial. You're presupposing there's a problem of Ukrainian fascism. So that's happening in the American sphere. People are saying, well, okay, what's your solution to the problem of Ukrainian fascism? Well, that question presupposes that there's a big problem there. And that's not something that one should accept. So similarly, using words, so the presuppositions of words, the words that are used presuppose certain practices. So Victor Klempereron, in The Language of the Third Reich, says that in the language they used to describe prisoners in concentration camps, they called them Stückgefangenen, prisoner pieces. Now, if you think of human beings as pieces, as pieces, then you can do anything you want to them. When you measure lives in terms of Kadaververwertung, the utilization of carcasses, then you're presupposing practices towards those people that should never be directed against human beings. So similarly, in Golfo Alexopoulos's great recent work on the Gulag, she talks about how the official language used to refer to death in prison, to the death of people imprisoned in the Gulag, was labor loss. So you're acting, you're just like, their only function of these people is to work. And when they die, it's a loss of labor for the country. So these ways of talking presuppose practices that you should not, and ways of thinking, both practices and ways of thinking that towards people that you shouldn't ever apply to people. So to speak of prisoners as pieces involves employing a way of speaking to describe humans that has presuppositions that that restrict its application to non-humans. Only non-humans are pieces. And to understand counting Kadaververtung, you have to think about, the relationship between official terms and practices. Now, people can be attuned to practices and ideologies. The nature of the attunement can be dispositional, emotional, or doxastic. And the point of propaganda is to attune people to a practice. So the point of revenge propaganda, the point of saying, oh, they're attacking our people, they're doing a genocide of our people, is to attune people to revenge. And repeating things, the point is repeated attunement. Okay, I'm going to have to. So typically in the model of the theory of meaning, we only talk about words presupposing propositions. So when you say, what's your solution to the fascism problem, you're presupposing there's a problem of fascism, that there is a problem of fascism. But words also presuppose practices. When the Hutus called Tutsis snakes, they were presupposing a practice of killing snakes as a way to make you a man. So I'm going to go a bit more quickly here. I'm going to go quickly because we don't have time to go through these details. Okay. In the theory of meaning, we generally say, we talk about people presupposing the same thing. So in a conversation, we all share these common presuppositions. We all share the presupposition that Kyiv is in Ukraine, that Washington, D.C. is in the United States, that I'm speaking. You're all presupposing that Jason Stanley is speaking. Jason Stanley is a professor. But we also presuppose, when we speak, we're attuned to things. Right now, we're all attuned to our computers. Right now, we're all attuned to my words, my speech. And we can talk about the things that are in common, that are common ground, that are common between us as the things that we're all very highly attuned to. So now we're all attuned. You're all attuned to me speaking. I'm attuned to we're all attuned to these slides. Okay. So I'm going to what we do, so accommodation is when someone presupposes something and you accommodate to it. This is something we do all the time, and we usually do it very rapidly. So if I say I'm going to pick up my sister from the airport, you very rapidly accommodate the proposition that I have a sister. And accommodation is meant to be a common ground repair, because the idea in philosophy and theory of meaning is that we have a common ground and we're constantly making sure that we have the same common ground. But when you have groups that hate each other, that's not what, they don't share a common ground. One group's, the same people that one group refers to as terrorists are for another group freedom fighters. Those are two very different ways of thinking of the same kind of people, but it's because you have very different perspectives. So we need to think of reactions to speech as not just accommodating, accepting, but also rejecting. If I encounter someone I disagree, who's in a group that I'm opposed to, and they presuppose something, I might be led to reject them. So that's what's going on with that's what goes on with a lot of perfectly rational people seemingly accepting irrational things. It's because they've come to mistrust the source of those things so much that they're just going to reject whatever the common presupposition of, say, science, of, say, vaccine scientists is. because those people are the enemy. So you can move away. So when you make people enemies, you can make your own audience reject anything those people say or presuppose. So here you're not just presupposing. So this move to attunements, you're not just presupposing matching beliefs. You're also accommodating to dispositions and emotions. So what does this mean? We normalize to the presuppositions of others when they are members of our in-group. But if we just think of this as all we do, then we're forgetting in-group, out-group distinctions. If a central purpose of language is to draw in-group, out-group distinctions, then we shouldn't idealize away from them. So when someone's in an out-group, you go away from what they presuppose. If they presuppose something as common ground, you're going to reject it. So what you do, one function of political speech is to get people to shut out, distrust, reject the presuppositions of the people you're attacking. So the facts of my enemy are the enemies of my facts. So one group is so you create a conspiracy theory, you say those people are trying to kill, those people are doing a genocide, the Ukrainians are doing a genocide of ethnic Russians, so anything they say can't be trusted, anything they presuppose can't be trusted. The facts of my enemy are the enemies of my facts. So this is a process that takes a while. The run-up to the Rwandan genocide took many, many months. It took many, many months, years, two years, but 6 months of really intense hate speech in order to, before you got buy-in from a large population. So there's you need so that you haven't had that kind of a run up and lead up to the unprovoked vicious imperialist attack on Ukraine. You haven't really had that years of fully saturated revenge and hate directed against Ukraine, suggesting that the Russian population has not been is not prepared for this kind of violence. So I'm going to quickly do just a couple topics and then end. So what about dog whistles? So a dog whistle is a word that's part of multiple speech practices, and the reason and the way it works is that a politician can use a dog whistle, knowing that it's part of multiple speech practices, an innocent speech practice that's perfectly fine. But if someone says hate Jews, hate Jews, hates Jews, or hates Ukrainians, or hates Black Americans, then they'll be part of that other speech practice. But the politician can say, "Oh, I was only using it in the innocent way, not in the non-innocent way." So each word we use is actually part of many speech practices. And we're always trying to add new speech practice. We're always trying to, politicians are always trying to create new speech practices so they can do more with each word. And then as opposed to dog whistles, we have bullhorns. Bullhorns are very obvious attacks on a group. So slurs are an example, explicit racial slurs. When a politician uses a slur or explicitly calls someone, a Nazi, what they're doing is, well, that's a bit more complicated when you call, because they're what you're doing is you're really saying we should treat them like we treat Nazis. A slur is different. A slur is a history brings with it a history of a negative ideology towards that group. And when you use a slur in public, what you're saying is that ideology is okay. It's okay to talk about people that way because, I'm going to openly use it. So so what it does is it's a bullhorn. It says, it's now okay to think of people in this extremely negative way. Okay, so I'm going to go quickly to echo chambers, and then I'm going to end. So how does this give an understanding of echo chambers? So the philosopher Thi Nguyen draws a distinction between epistemic bubbles and echo chambers. An epistemic bubble is just when you don't even receive any information from anyone else, like North Korea. The North Korean population just doesn't receive any information from anyone else. An epistemic bubble is not a big problem. It just means, you got to get rid of the super authoritarian state, but you just have to provide the information. People be like, I never heard that. So that's an epistemic bubble. An echo chamber is more complicated, and an echo chamber is the harder social epistemic problem. An echo chamber is when you create such mistrust for other groups. Using conspiracy theories is the normal tactic. You create such mistrust for other groups that even when they speak, you reject their presuppositions, you reject their reality, because the conspiracy theory has so undermined them. And so this happens in liberal democracies, be they Ukraine or the United States or Germany. You just get different groups and they mistrust each other. Now, how do you deal? That's just the nature of a democracy. Democracy allows different groups with very different values who distrust each other. That's going to happen. So but in a healthy democracy, what's a sign of a healthy democracy? The sign of a healthy democracy is when lots of people who disagree and are normally in different echo chambers also have a social identity where they're all members of the same group, say Ukrainians or liberal Democrats. And so each of us has a different social identity. Maybe these people are anti-Semites or hostile to LGBT, and these people are feminists, and these people are LGBT activists. But when it comes to defending the country, they're all, say, Ukrainians. So the way you see what a healthy democracy is when people have a powerful social identity, a social identity of the sort that Pericles tries to create in his famous funeral oration, when he binds Athenian identity to democracy. And he says, whatever our differences, we Athenians are Democrats. And that is indeed how to create a nation. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Stanley. It was a wonderful lecture. I will wait for questions. We have people on YouTube, on Facebook, and I will monitor all that. I should address my background. We just had the airstrike alarm, and my shower is one of the shelters which I use. So I apologize for this change of the background, but I'm fine, and I advise all my students to move to shelters if they watch now. So there is one question already in the chat. I will read it, and and maybe we can talk about this. So so the question comes from Maria Tamaniuk, and she asks, if there is no pure information, how do we call something propaganda? Calling something propaganda seems to presuppose that those who talk are above the propaganda context, standing on the more correct position.
Excellent. So great question, showing that so that was definitely my perspective in my 2015 book, How Propaganda Works, that propaganda is this muddy thing, and it muddies the pure information space. And the goal is to clear it up, and then you've got a pure information space. This model, that's not going to work, because everything we say, every word we use is part of a speech practice, indeed multiple speech practices. The speech practices locate us. Think of the words you use. You can tell what city someone from, right? I mean, the words they use will tell you what city they come from. They'll often tell you the way they refer to a sandwich in the United States, whether you call it a grinder, a sub sandwich, a hoagie, or a hero. Those will all tell you whether you're from Philadelphia, Chicago. So the words we use locate us. You know, this idea that we could use words that don't locate us, pure words don't exist. So you don't want to give a theory of speech that requires there to be pure words, because that would be a theory of speech for aliens. So it's a great question then. How do we then characterize what's democratically and politically okay from speech that is not? And I think that you'd have to do it in terms of the ideologies it attunes you to. So the ideologies, there are anti-democratic ideas. So by the way, propaganda is a neutral word. Pericles links Athenian identity to democracy. That is political propaganda. He's trying to say, we are the Democrats, and that is who we are. He's linking that identity to the speech links Athens to democracy. What it is to be Athenian is to be a Democrat, and it's not to be an imperialist subject of an authoritarian autocratic state. But it's good propaganda. It's good to link your identity to democracy. So I think we have to maybe drop the idea that I'm not going to give an overall characterization of propaganda, but we should think about speech that links us to authoritarianism, speech that blocks off our capacity to view other humans as humans, and that's problematic speech. But all speech locates us, gives us a perspective.
Thank you. So while everyone else is waiting, I will just take advantage of me being a moderator, so I can ask some of my questions. I was intrigued by the way you stressed this word attuned, and you spent quite a lot of time talking about it. And I was thinking, can it be also used in slightly different sense, in a sense of being alarmed? So in a way, when people are aware of the power of language, and people are aware of the threat of propaganda, perhaps people can just, by being attuned, people can also at the same time being alarmed to combat propaganda and pre-bunk it. Do you think do you think there is a way for people just to design some linguistic or social norms to address propaganda, to be alarmed against it and to pre-bunk it?
So that actually was one of the motivations of the very development of analytic philosophy in Europe in between World War I and World War II. And it was even one of the developments, the reasons for applying logic to language in the Polish school of logicians. The idea was, maybe we'll have a general semantics that will enable us to have this neutral way of speaking, so we won't be susceptible to propaganda. So that was actually a motivation. People forget that was a motivation in the interwar period for the development of my very discipline, I'm a philosopher in the analytic tradition. This idea that we won't be responsive to emotional appeals, we won't be responsive to this if we're if we have the tools of logic. But we need to be responsive to emotion. I would say we need to be responsive to emotional appeals. We need to be responsive to the right emotional appeals, the right speeches, the ones that connect. It's not wrong to be emotional about your country. It's not wrong to be emotional about the city you come from, but it's wrong to be emotional in a fascist way. It's wrong to be like, Cleon says, to be an empire, you must say the only people there are Athenians, and everyone else is either Athenian or there are subjects. That's the wrong way to do the emotional attachments. The right way to do the emotional attachments is connected to ideals of general humanity that would prevent you from killing innocent people, for example. So I think the project of trying for a neutral position, is understandable, but I think we need to be more realistic about the ubiquity of propaganda. The previous question, what was the questioner's name? Atamaniok. It was really good. Their worry is, what about truth? Do you give up on truth if everything has emotion, everything has perspective? Isn't the way to combat propaganda have a neutral perspective? But we have to face the fact that there is truth, there is reality. We can be attuned to the world, but there's no neutral aperspectival take on reality. There's no neutral aperspectival way of describing reality. And if we think that we need that in order to combat propaganda, we'll never combat propaganda. So, combat bad propaganda. Propaganda reflects its ideologies. I'm a liberal Democrat. My ideology, I think the good ideology is we are all humans. You don't do things, democracy is a system that recognizes other people as equal. and that's a good ideology. And we need to bind that ideology to us and use it to combat other ideologies that are pernicious, which is the ultimate, that's why we return to Thucydides. That's why we return to, the two visions, democracy versus empire and colonialism, sketched by Pericles and Cleon.
That's fascinating, because from what I have observed here in Ukraine and Russia, reading quite a lot of social media and debates and collecting and analyzing some data, I have seen that quite a lot of Ukrainians, through some trials and errors and just, dialogue and collective wisdom, arrived to very similar conclusion to yours without using any references to philosophy and analytical philosophy. So this idea that you cannot be neutral when you comprehensively talking about propaganda and trying to position yourself in this debate, you simply cannot be neutral. And there is a very big debate between Ukrainian activists and Russian activists and artists, people who claim that you can just perform art and be outside of politics or outside of political debate, that sport is neutral, art is neutral, science is neutral.
Those things have never been neutral. One time I asked, so in the 1968 Mexico City Olympics, there were two American sprinters who raised their fist, the Black Power fist, and lost their careers and so Tommy Smith and John Carlos, famous picture of the American sprinters, gold medalists and bronze medalists. And John Carlos gave a lecture, and I went to see his lecture, and I asked him, what do you say to the charge that your protest politicized the Olympics? And he burst out laughing, and he said, "You're kidding me, right? We spent weeks and weeks training for the Olympics." And they said, "You're not allowed to lose to the Russian. You're not allowed to the people from the Soviet Union. You're not allowed to lose to the people from China. You can lose to the guy from England. You can lose to the French guy. Doesn't matter." The Olympics have always been political. He's like, that's the most extent. So the Olympics were about the Cold War.
Exactly. And I hope I can still use, a few minutes of your time because I wanted to ask you about something else. You have, you have emphasized that you're discussing language and you're focused on it and speech and symbolism. And yet I want to ask, perhaps you can speculate about visual and nonverbal communication, especially given that right now the world is dominated by social media, and we observe quite a lot of events now through the lenses of TikTok and Instagram. Every day, myself and all people around me, we're watching TikToks of Ukrainian and Russian soldiers displaying what they're not hiding. They either brag or just report, or maybe participate in some coordination, information flow. I don't know, but the content is vast, and this combination of visual and non-verbal communication should, I suppose, play a significant role in creating these symbols and social meaning without using language per se. So can you somehow position this into your theory?
Right, absolutely. Our theory is designed, fits speech into this larger picture of attunements. So a picture says 1,000 words. Pictures attune us too. Pictures, a powerful picture will look at a picture and say, we'll look at some of the atrocities that Russia is committing in Ukraine and say, nothing justifies that. There's nothing that anyone can say that can justify that. But that's also, when Putin says, oh, they're slaughtering ethnic Russians in Eastern Ukraine, that's completely made up, but you're supposed to think the same thing. You're supposed to think nothing can justify that. But so a picture, if you think of during the Syrian refugee crisis, when another atrocity that this Russian regime caused, the young 3-year-old boy drowned on the beach. That did so much to transform the world. So what a picture does is it does shut down debate. A good picture. It says there's no excuse for a drowned 3-year-old on a beach. The world cannot stand for that. So pictures are very powerful in the ways they emotionally attune you and the ways they can draw discussion to an end. So our focus is on speech because we're both, we study speech, but we're putting speech into this larger structure of social meaning that pictures have. And this apparatus of attunement. What's special about speech is that each word is part of a social practice, and the social practices of a whole sentence, they come together. They're structured, and so there's so much going on in a sentence, so much specificity.
Yeah, it's ironic that at least this is my intuition and a gut feeling, that somehow Russian media and propaganda machine has become its own hostage, that they have created some sort of an consistent images and ideas and symbols. And when these images or symbols, they don't work anymore, they cannot simply drop them and create something new. They have to stick to this narrative, even at the cost of being laughed at. So just to give you a practical example, there is this famous or infamous group of Russian soldiers from Chechnya. They're called Kadyrovцы, which is the narrative is constructed that they are great fighters and troopers, and they should come to Ukraine to perform as the best legion or something like that. But in fact, what they're doing, they just marching around somewhere in villages, they making TikToks and Instagram, they're just firing in the sky, and they do not participate in the actual combat, which makes other people kind of suspicious. So actually people who watch this on social media, they're rather laughing at this performance. so, and they are not taken seriously anymore. So, and
propaganda can backfire.
Yeah, propaganda
but
can
you
backfire.
Can't switch,
yeah.
But you can't. Our work explains this. You can't switch quickly from once you choose a narrative, because it takes time. There's always you need a propaganda campaign. So we talk about adaptation, that accommodation is adaptation over time. So what I think happened is you had a very quick propaganda campaign that in no way created any kind of it takes months and years to motivate, to get people behind unjustified violent action. And so what you had in the Russian case was a very quick propaganda campaign that was designed to create fear, intimidation, and all of this very quickly. And it didn't work immediately, because propaganda campaigns don't work immediately. They take a long time. You can't just drop it.
Yeah. As you said, it can backfire and you cannot change it quickly. Absolutely. Yeah. Well, we are running out of time. If you don't mind, I would like just to close this presentation with our own propaganda. Yeah, here at Kyiv School of Economics, we emphasize that these lectures also designed not only to share knowledge and discuss knowledge, but also to raise awareness and to keep talking about Ukraine. And we have created our own donation page, and we ask people who are watching to donate to support humanitarian aid in Ukraine. We have our own foundation for that. It is registered in Washington, D.C., so it's quite transparent. You can pay in dollars, euros, cryptos. American organizations can expect all the tax deductions. And we believe that this is very important to donate to local Ukrainian organizations, not only to us, to any certified Ukrainian organization, because we know how it works on the ground, we know the logistics, and we know what kind of stuff should be delivered immediately. And we are working with medical kits, with helmets, with bulletproof vests. I will put our donation page to the chat, but it is very easy to find us. You can just Google Kyiv School of Economics and you'll find our donation page on the very first main web page of our school. And Jason, Professor Stanley, thank you very much. I would love to talk with you all day. I think it was an amazing presentation, and I actually enjoyed both your slides and our Q&A session. It's such a pleasure to have this open conversation, and I wish to invite you to Peaceful Kyiv, and you can present your books, you can talk to our students. When everything is over, we will be very, very happy to host you and to talk about other philosophical concepts.
Thank you. I was in Kyiv in 2017 speaking to the School of Ukrainian School of Political Studies, and I loved the city, and Ukraine is just wonderful.
Thank you very much. So we're looking forward to have you there again. Thank you, and